I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're waiting for a few more people to sign up, but I think we'll at least get started with the intro and hope a few more people will sign on between now and then. Thank you all for joining our webinar today. My name is Yarrow Brown and I'm the Executive Director of Housing North. We're excited to bring you this webinar titled Only Homes Will Help Homelessness. As many of you know, I'm gonna go through my slide here to just remind you of a little bit of webinar etiquette here. Let's see if it'll work. To make sure your microphone is muted, you can submit questions during the presentations, and I believe Ashley and Ryan, who are presenting, will try to engage the audience a little, so you can unmute during that today and ask some questions. As many of you know, Housing North was formed about a year and a half ago to address barriers in housing development in our area. Our mission is to create pathways and partnerships for housing in Northwest Michigan with the goal to build awareness, influence policy, and expand capacity so communities can create housing solutions and meet their unique needs. Today's topic is asking how housing and homelessness partners can work together to create those homes. In Sarah's March 2020 article in the Record Eagle, she touched on how health begins at home, and especially during this pandemic, how housing is necessary for health, safety, and welfare. Housing North is working closely with partners such as the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, which you will hear from today, to help address our severe housing shortage and learn how we can compile resources and work together to make a bigger difference. Ashley and Ryan. Ashley's here from the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homeless, as well as Ryan Hannon from Goodwill. And they're going to introduce the coalition, discuss members' work and services, along with ideas for moving forward with housing partners. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and Ryan.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. Sorry, guys, just give me a second. Oh, never mind. You think we'd have this figured out by now, right? It's a call we do all day.
There you go.
There. Now let's just get it to the slideshow. Okay. All right, thanks, Yarrow. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today around this very important conversation around housing and homelessness. So what we're going to try to do today is talk a little bit in the beginning about our work at the coalition, and then really try to braid that into the affordability issue we have in our region and how we need to be collaborative around solutions for housing. So like Yarrow said, my name is Ashley Halliday-Schmant, and I am the director of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness. Prior to my role as director, I worked at the Community Action Agency as both a housing-based case manager, as well as a supervisor and program manager of homeless services and programs across our 10-county region. Today, Ryan is here with me. Ryan is a subject matter expert in all things street outreach. Ryan is a nationally recognized leader in the work to end homelessness, and locally he is in charge of managing the street outreach and housing navigations program for the Greater Grand Traverse region. So again, thank you guys all for coming today. Ryan and I don't have 90 minutes or probably even 60 minutes of content for you. And we don't really like to do these. We've done these lots over the years, and we really like it to be interactive. So we don't like to just talk at folks for extended periods of time. So please use the chat function, unmute, do all the Zoom things to make this interactive. So together, Ryan and I are dedicated members of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness. I get paid, and Ryan's just a dedicated member. But the coalition is a collaboration of agencies working to end homelessness by addressing housing issues through a community-based process that develops a comprehensive, coordinated continuum of care to individuals and families who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. Kind of a mouthful. So just for some framing, we want to be really clear around our purpose and why we exist. And that is ultimately to end homelessness. An end to homelessness does not mean that no one will ever be homeless ever again. We unfortunately know that over time, folks will fall in and out of homelessness forever, likely. However, an end to homelessness does mean that the experience of homelessness should be rare, brief, and one time. However, in order for it to be rare, brief, and one time, when folks do experience it, we essentially need four things. And really those four things are a system that works, a system that can pivot and iterate when needed. We need a system that works for the people we serve, not just for the government or the agencies that we all work for. It needs to ultimately be grounded in the work of serving the people that we have the privilege of serving. We also need the funding. We have that. We have quite a bit of that. And then we need backbone structure and support to really oversee all of this work. We talk a lot in our work about systems change and that we cannot nonprofit our way out of this thing. An end to homelessness means true buy-in from all sectors of communities, not just the nonprofit world. And that's where the coalition really comes in, is having backbone structure, support, and staffing that we have now to really lift this work up, because the agencies and the nonprofits actually on the ground doing this work don't always have the capacity to do that. And then finally, and I would argue maybe most importantly, we need housing. So homelessness for folks does not mean people need to get jobs. It does not mean people need to stop being lazy. It means we need housing. And we cannot end this until we have housing for all people experiencing homelessness. And then before I go to our structure, I do just want to give a shameless plug. So part of this too, we need landlords. So when we get into the solution part of this, some of that will be landlords, some of that could be housing development, but we will get into that in a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit here, not so much about our structure, because that's pretty boring. Just know we have one, and we are finally at a place where we're able to support the work of all the agencies doing this through a backbone mechanism and the committee structure that actually makes the work possible. So when we think about homelessness in our 10-county region, last year, so throughout all of 2019, about 1,600 people experienced homelessness in our region. So that doesn't mean every day of 2019 there were 1,600 people homeless. It just means over that year, 1,600 people entered our system. So if we think about a system and kind of a funnel mechanism, we need to end homelessness, we need as many people or more exiting our system than entering. And I'll tell you right now, we don't have 1,600 positive exits to housing every year. What that also doesn't mean is that we need 1,600 one-bedroom units, right? In our service world, and I'll go to the next slide here, we know that about only 80% of the 1,600 people experiencing homelessness actually need need anything from our system. So about 80% of folks are going to self-resolve. And that's a nationally recognized number. A few years ago, we had a consultant come in and analyze our system, and they told us, you don't need to serve all these 1,600 people the same way, because 80% of them are going to figure it out on their own. And and at the time we did not believe that. Now we do. And I was just looking over the data prepping for this, and the numbers are still consistent around that. So of 1,600 folks, we're really concerned about roughly around 300 to 400 people. So roughly 80% of the 1,600 are the folks that are continuously experiencing homelessness. And Ryan, if you could talk a little bit about how many folks, at least in the Grand Traverse region, are experiencing homelessness like night after night long term.
Night after night, long term. Thank you, Ashley. Really quick, thank you for the excellent introduction. And just to be clear, I also do get paid. I
Just not by us.
Right. It's the
Right.
coalition has that backbone support now, and with Ashley and Dave. But really, that's to strengthen the system. We've been gathering as agencies and organizations to work out this homeless response system, and I'm really proud and glad to be able to be part of the system, and certainly remember the days when there was no system like this. So I really appreciate the work Ashley's doing here. We see long term, year after year, we see about 70 people that have been experiencing homelessness for, I'd say, 3-4 years or more. Um, on any given day, we see about 150 or so people experiencing homelessness out there on the streets, some in and out of shelter. So that number compared to that 1,600 is, dramatically different. So in outreach, we focus and target our time and energy and efforts on those people that have experienced homelessness a long time and who are out there on the streets and in and out of shelters, over and over again. So we certainly don't have enough time and capacity or energy to reach everybody out there, and that's good because we shouldn't. Like the numbers show, most people will end their own homelessness. So we don't want to certainly get in the way of that, but we also don't want to take away our efforts from the most vulnerable, if you will, on the streets and trying to help them access the housing. A long time ago, when Ashley talked about the consultant coming in, the consultant also had this tool that helped us um, prioritize the most vulnerable, really to target those people who are out there. And when I started doing that, it changed the way I did outreach. It really showed me the people that needed me most weren't asking for my help. Certainly sometimes, and over time as you get known, but the majority of people figure it out on their own or just with a little support. So our outreach people on the ground, we get out there and make sure we're targeting and being as efficient as we can, reaching those folks. So real long answer to your question. About 70 people that are I'd say 4 years or longer out there on the streets.
Right. And so where we could get that 300, 400-ish number would then be, that times a 10 county look. And certainly other counties outside of Grand Traverse have different issues around housing and access than we do. But I would say that it's an issue everywhere.
And I would really quick, Ashley, also that usually doesn't, I'm not counting the majority of the people in the shelter or shelters. So
right.
that little low is mostly on the streets or safe harbor sometimes.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the numbers. Just want to go a tiny bit more into the system. So this is a pretty basic look at a very complex system. It's complex, but it's not complicated. So we really want to get consistent in our messaging around that. The way that we end homelessness is a complex issue. It's a complex social problem that our country is experiencing and our local communities are experiencing. However, the solution is quite clear. We need to identify people who are experiencing homelessness. We need to give some of them who want/need emergency shelter access to that. And then ultimately we need housing for folks to enter into. And so in the green section of our system is where we talk about the different ways we can do that. Why it's kind of green, that 80%, we're finding about 80% of folks are going to be able to do that on their own. And we could probably even expand that number if we said people who can do it with just a little bit of help. So maybe they just need a security deposit. They just need to be told, hey man, you don't want to enter this system. Because sometimes folks do get it in their head that if I spend one night outside, maybe I'm going to get this magical housing voucher. And that's not the case, right? So sometimes all it takes is that conversation by our very talented street outreach staff to say, look, if you have other places to go that are safe and adequate, please do that. You do not want to enter the system if you don't have to. Certainly if you have to, we need emergency shelters, but really we need housing. Shelter is not the answer to ending homelessness. Giving people tents is not the answer to ending homelessness. Giving people food is not the answer to ending homelessness. Housing is the answer to ending it. And so some of the mechanisms we have in place to do that are rapid rehousing funds, and that's something we'll talk about in solutions also. But this year alone, just our Grand Traverse region, so this number probably close to doubles if we talk about a 10 county number, but our 10 county region will have around about $100,000 in rental assistance that will go unused. So the federal government awards agencies in our coalition rental assistance dollars that could be permanent supportive housing, meaning we pay people's rent for the rest of their life. Those are the folks who, this 18% number that the 300 or 18% that I keep talking about 18% of our population needs that really long-term support. Probably even fewer, I would say probably fewer, because some of that 18 can be cut and go into rapid rehousing, which is rental assistance, but just for a shorter period of time. It can be anywhere from 1 month to 2 years, up to 2 years. So in those spaces, we have lots of money, lots of support, not a lot of places to put people. So that's why that money will go unused. It will not go unused because we don't have case managers or we don't have the people, right? We've seen the data. We see that there are people that could use that money, but we don't have the housing. So, Ryan, did you have anything else you want to add on that before we move on?
Well, when we think about those dollars and how much, I often think of some of the little towns we do outreach in around the 5-county area and how, I guess for lack of a better term, kind of run down they look, right? And I think if there's a way we can help spread the word that, these subsidies, are here to help the people we serve, but that can also pour money into these communities, at least in a small way, to help. I don't know if economic growth is the right word, but people, landlords in the communities are getting rent paid. People are living there. They're getting back on their feet and spending money. So,
yeah, that's a great point. We can, having fewer people on the streets is good for communities in lots of ways. And that's a great selling point. Economically, it is good for communities. We're giving money back into the communities directly through housing people. So that was a great segue into this slide, which is I think this was relatively old Zillow study, but we kind of use that. And a lot of people always ask us, where does the 30% of income thing come from? So there's the kind of national recognized number that anybody should be spending about 30% of their income on housing. And so when it goes over that, you can expect a higher increase in homelessness, or people that are, I wouldn't even go that far. I would say maybe people that are more likely to experience homelessness when folks are spending significantly more than that. This study said 32%, but we know in high rent market areas, it's going way above that for everyone. Go ahead.
Do we know what our area looks like? How many people are spending 32 or more % of their income on housing?
I couldn't find that. All I could find was, unless Sarah knows, or Yarrow, I only could find that in Grand Traverse County, um, people were spending on average about 28% of their income.
I don't know off the top of my head. Sarah might know.
Strangely, I can tell you what people are spending on average for the combined costs of housing and transportation, which is a benchmark that we've been trying to focus on over the last several years because so much depends on where you live. So if you're living far away from your work, then even if your house is cheaper on paper, you're spending just as much money on gas and car maintenance and that kind of thing. So in our region, it's around the average is about 54% of a household's income that's spent on the combined costs of housing and transportation. So you're spending over half of your income on just those two costs. And so then you have little left over for, groceries and medicine and everything else that we need to get through life. So we can share that information. I'll share a link that has the average housing costs and percentage of income for all the counties in the region as a follow-up to this webinar, just so people have that information.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I like this slide here that shows the wages and stuff. I know, working with the people out there and living unsheltered in tents and then also in and out of shelter, how often people actually have jobs. A lot of times, like in restaurants around town, and it's interesting to me how they work, and a lot of times misconceptions about homelessness is people don't work and that sort of thing. And we talk about you don't need a job to end homelessness, and just the aspect of the reality, showing the reality of what homelessness is. And I'm glad that we're talking about a housing issue here, because it really is. I think it was a city worker. We were looking at an area that kind of had some abandoned camps and there was a lot of trash around. And we went in there to look for like a pickup point. And the city worker got to talk to some people that were living back there. And one of the guys he was talking to, said, I gotta go off to work. And he was talking about the restaurant he worked at and how many hours he worked and how the city guy was like, how often he goes and eats at that restaurant. It was really kind of a practical example of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, and I think another example of that, Ryan, was last week or the week before when you and I were doing I went with Ryan and did outreach. We went to a spot that has pretty established camp, lots of tents, lots of people living there. None of them were there. It was the middle of the day because they were all working. So, folks are working, folks are doing this, but this slide really, I think, speaks to that. They're not making enough, nor do we have, they're not only not making enough to rent some here that's deemed affordable, but if we go to the next slide, I think I had, this is all Sarah's data, so thank you, awesome. When we look, we don't have enough. So we don't even have enough of the units that we actually need. So not make there aren't enough in existence leads to a problem for our entire community. But usually and we're seeing this a lot, right, with all things in our country right now, when we have a problem, a community problem or a public problem like homelessness, like COVID, like so many other things, marginalized folks are experiencing that tenfold. So when I'm moving here, I'm new to Traverse City, my husband and I are moving here, we both have jobs, we can't find housing, right? Now we're thinking about marginalized folks who are living outside, who are really just trying to get by. They're experiencing this housing crisis tenfold. They don't have folks to stay with, they don't have family members all the time. So yeah, really thinking about how the intersection can happen between housing and homelessness providers or developers, and really being solution focused in our work to think about lifting up the voices of the marginalized people, and having access and opportunities for them as well. So that brings us to solutions. So a lot of, I don't want to sound like a broken record. We don't have housing because Ryan and I were talking actually a couple months ago. The more we say we don't have housing, the more we become complacent in thinking there isn't housing, and really there is. So even since the pandemic started in March, we as a coalition, just in the 5-county region, have probably housed over 15 to 20 individuals and families. So that's an incredible amount of people, and working in this new and strange way, still able to do that. So it's not to say we never house people, or that we have no housing, but we need more. So ways we've been successful in doing that, one of the ways is targeted or set aside units in existing or new developments for people experiencing homelessness. So one thing I think would be really beneficial for our community every time a new development goes up, if we could just have one unit, right? Like we've built the Carson Square and the Brooksides and the Keystones, and then, you know, what happens, they get filled up and then we're here again. So we need this over and over and over again. And we're not asking for, I mean, it'd be great, but we're not asking for half the development, right? We're asking for single units here and there that are targeted for our folks. We've also talked about things around deed restrictions, with some hopefully potential development that we're starting near Leelanau County, but trying to find some different and creative ways to get units here and there. Our biggest push is always private market landlords with scattered site units willing to participate with our rental assistance programs. That's where most of our folks are housed. They're not housed in big apartment complexes. They're housed in duplexes or just apartments throughout our community. And another way we found helpful, and hopefully it will be in the future, incentive programs for landlords to participate with our programs. So we're kicking off this month a 100-day challenge to house 15 families in the next 100 days. And one of the ways we're doing that is a lease signing bonus for landlords. So new landlords who are willing to participate in our program could be offered a lease signing bonus. It's just kind of like a thank you for working with us and agreeing to participate in this cause. And then obviously we need policy changes at the state and national level to make it easier for affordable housing to be developed in rural areas. All the things that Housing North are great at doing, and that's kind of where this intersection and this partnership is really critical. Ryan, do you want to talk about kind of the Carson Square, Keystone, that sort of development process and how that came to be?
Yep, I'll touch on that a little bit. It was interesting. You talked about scattered site is certainly the most ideal way to go to integrate folks back into the community as natural as possible. A lot of the funding streams produce these kind of apartment projects, if you will. And I remember, most people do go through the scattered site, but each time there's an apartment complex or a portion of an apartment complex specifically for, people moving out of homelessness. We saw the numbers of the people we serve. We fill them up as soon as they can open up, we fill them. And we need another and more. So we certainly need some of that. But it's just interesting to watch. I remember when Keystone Village started, and it was a partnership with Homestretch and Mishta and some others that I'm probably forgetting, but I like Goodwill owned the land, so we sold it or donated it or something like that to help make that process possible. And I remember looking at plans for Brookside Commons many years ago, and finally it was built, and we're able to part of the set aside, if you will, was 24 project-based voucher units, which is a partnership with MISTA that funds like a housing voucher for those units. Kind of an, I don't know if it's interesting, but it's kind of cool. I think there was also 2 additional units that were set aside for the program called Northwest Michigan Supportive Housing, which is also a permanent supportive housing program. So the people we're working with to get off the streets, the most vulnerable getting into these apartments, is so good to see when we're working with the folks to get them in there. The Carson Square was Goodwill built with the partnership with MISTA and project-based vouchers, but we also, part of it was the Traverse City Housing Commission. So they are a public housing authority as well. So they hold some of the vouchers as well. So working with MISTA and having the tax incentive kind of not fairs, but they every so often, I think it's 2 to 4 times a year, they'll have these tax incentive programs that folks can apply for, organizations and governments to build stuff like this. But it takes a partnership with development, nonprofit, and a public housing authority. So Carson Square was that, and it filled. We were able to write in 22, no, it was 11 units specific for chronic homelessness. And when we saw our chart in the beginning that chronic homelessness is one of the categories we target as a coalition. So chronic homelessness is long-term homelessness or over and over again homelessness with a disability documented. So certainly most of the folks we work with out there in the streets, at least, fit into one of those categories. So the partnership to make it happen is really important. And it took like 3 or 4 rounds of applying for these government assistance to build Carson Square. It's hard for nonprofits. I remember the Goodwill was wondering, like, do we even try again? And they tried one more time, and it worked. So a lot goes into it, but it's not one government, it's not one organization. It's a lot of things coming together, and I can't stress that enough. We also, an example of like a deed restriction. So some of us might remember the Safe Harbor rotating winter emergency shelter through the churches got too big for the smaller churches, and they needed a building. So they purchased a building from the city, the old Boys and Girls Club, and then the unit or the lot next door, the city threw in with the purchase, but deed restricted it that it had to be affordable housing had to be built there. So it's kind of a partnership with the city, kind of pushing it in the direction to help affordable housing, which is so encouraging to see. We see a lot of development and high-end development in Traverse City, which I don't want to take away from that. Sometimes people, kind of knock that all the time. Like that part's good, but we have to bring up the bottom portion, if you will, the portion of the high versus the low can't be so disproportionate. So this was a way for the city to kind of help move that along. So that will be, it's when COVID hit, that really kind of put the problem solving and the looking at building process back, but Goodwill's looking at it again to get some of those tax incentives or MISTA building incentives to be able to put something there to help the affordable housing crisis there.
Do folks have questions or comments or anything yet? You can use chat or just unmute yourself. No.
Well, folks are thinking of that. I just want to say that the importance of advocacy
Mhm.
is huge. There's a lot of, pushback or other, I guess, money making ventures that can be put in a lot of these places, and we have to advocate for the need in a real way. And we saw a lot of that with the safe harbor shelter proposal, but then um, Housing North here and the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, and really looking at real solutions. I when I'm interviewing people, students, or whatever, when they're talking about homelessness and advocacy, I say you have to look at all sides. Like, I don't know how many developers I've talked to who are sensitive to our cause and want to help, but there's barriers in place that make it next to impossible or very difficult for developers on their own to do this stuff. So it really takes working together, and if we don't advocate together, it really slows down the process. Looks like we have a question there.
Oh, yay. That's what I was referring to. So earlier when I said there were set aside units, okay, so this might be different. So Mary said Leelanau Christian Neighbors is in support of the 10-unit housing in Sutton's Bay Township that is being looked at by Homestretch. We have committed to supplement rent on 2 of those units for 5 years once built. Awesome. And the other thing to that, so we're working right now on an MOU with Homestretch to take 2 more of those units and have them dedicated for people experiencing homelessness. So hopefully that means 2 additional. So then we'll have kind of this 4, but those 2 units that we're working with, we're also working, we have that partnership with Homestretch on another development in Traverse City for dedicated units. And then we've done that also at East Bay Flats, a project through the Traverse City Housing Commission. There's actually 14 dedicated units in that development. That was one of the first times, other than these bigger, really goodwill driven developments, that we had that experience to get 14 set aside units, and it's incredibly helpful. So
Ashley,
it's great.
just remind me, I think you might have said this, but how many vouchers are available that aren't being used?
So that's kind of hard. There's just a lot of mechanisms for that. So if we think about, when I said that the amount of money, that was rental assistance vouchers through HUD. So our coalition agencies that provide rapid rehousing, it's mostly in rapid rehousing that it's going unused, and permanent supportive housing, that's where the 100 to 150-ish thousand dollars will go unused. If we think about that at a 10 county level, it's much more. So I was just actually writing one of our annual grants for the MISHDA Emergency Solutions Grant Program, which is another rapid rehousing program. And I got some numbers from a rapid rehousing provider. We're going to be in one program alone that serves 5 counties in our 10 county region, underspent by at least another $100,000. So, and that, again, that's not the agency's fault, it's not the staff's fault, it's because we don't have enough housing to put folks in. If we think about housing choice vouchers, so that's the traditional, like what people refer to as Section 8 vouchers. I don't know, Ryan, do you know how many? I mean, every year our counties lose them permanently because we can't fill them. I don't know how many people have them right now.
That I put out a post that had, at the time, how many we were looking at least in this 5 county area, and there was about 15 people, I think it was like 17 people or families that had actual vouchers looking for places, and I think we filled 3 of those. This was probably back in March or April, and those are, like Ashley said, the traditional Section 8. The state has deemed those homeless preference. So people experiencing homelessness move up to the top of the list, which, you know, is meant to keep that list flowing. It still takes a while, but it's targeted toward homelessness. And that's where we need scattered site landlords, because the project-based vouchers go with the project. These MISHDA housing choice vouchers go with wherever in a scattered site. It could be an apartment complex, but it can't be one of the project-based voucher units. And that is separate from the rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing programs we see needing units. So that's why this is so important. It seems like sometimes it's a never-ending revolving door for folks. They get a voucher, they have essentially 4 months to find a place. If not, they lose the voucher, and then it goes to the next person, and then that person who lost it gets signed up again. So it can be discouraging for folks out there, but it's also a whole lot of money that is coming to our area here that's going unspent. So it looks like we have another question. Stephen, if I pronounced that right, asks, from what we've seen, which local municipalities have been most successful at attracting developers willing to include set-aside units, and what strategies have they used? He's coming from the perspective of a municipal staff planner.
I don't know if somebody else wants to speak to this one. Really, the ones that have happened, the only ones that we've had in our 10-county region for homeless specific. Now, other communities do set aside for people with disabilities or maybe a veteran or something like that. But the only time we've done this is in Grand Traverse County, which is surprising because that's the most expensive.
And it was the Traverse City Housing Commission specifically, I think, that we're able to set aside some units in East Bay Flats. But even that, the Carson Square development, that 11 units of chronic homelessness was a way to target that special population of homelessness. And that was, I'm so glad, because it's really hard for folks in that situation to be able to get out. But that was a success. I'm not sure how it's written, if those were the Traverse City Housing Commission vouchers, or if those were the ones that were through another public housing authority. But, you know, in the end, the bottom line, that whole project was all those people coming together and agreeing on that stuff. So shout out to the Traverse City Housing Commission. Go ahead.
I could maybe chime in a little bit on that. Stephen, most of or I think all of the developers that have done that have been nonprofits. And in trying to attract them to a community, what has been successful is, I think a common element in all of those projects has been the community is willing to provide land at below market value or donate it in some way. That's been a really effective strategy. And then there's also been, you know, some willingness to work with zoning regulations to make it a little bit easier to put those units in. That's been an important one. And there are some tax incentives that are available out there. It really requires a lot of partnership between the community and the nonprofit. And I think Ryan and Ashley have made the point that it's not just a single organization that can do this. It really requires a partnership, and the local government really does need to be a partner at the table. So that's a suggestion I would make, is that the community just needs to be at the table for these conversations and ready and willing to be flexible when things come up. I know the city of Traverse City has made quite a few changes over the last several months, actually, or is talking about making changes for, you know, zoning. They've rezoned property for homestretch, and they've talked about using city-owned property and changing parking minimums. And it's kind of, I don't want to say piecemeal, but it does require an ongoing conversation and ongoing participation from the community in order to be effective. And that's, to Ryan's point, really where we need a lot of advocacy, is just so that this stays in front of them constantly, because it's not one strategy that will fit all projects. it's multiple things that they have to be ready and willing to consider. I think
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to mention that there's a question from someone on the phone, but if you had another comment, Yarrow.
That's what I was going to say. I just figured out how to allow people to unmute themselves, so I apologize. I'm learning the settings. So Susan, if you're on the phone, go ahead and ask.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Susan Odgers. I'm the chair of the Traverse City Human Rights Commission, and I work very closely with Ryan about a lot of different things, a lot of the folks that are on today. And if my question was addressed early on, I'm sorry, I had trouble getting on today. But one of the things Ryan's helped educate me about is the discrimination folks experience based on their source of income. And he's talked to me about the legislation that's being worked on to try to change that. When I let the city commissioners know about that, that was real news to most of them. And I'm wondering, as the Human Rights Commission, when we're talking about it takes everybody, if maybe we should try to put forth a request for an ordinance that says, or a resolution, that we need at least one unit per these developments for our folks that are experiencing homelessness. I just wondered what you thought about another angle that maybe the Human Rights Commission could take.
Yes. I'll let you guys go, but yes.
I love that idea, and you know, we've had some conversations about it over the years. The idea that for all the developments that occur, we need to set aside some affordable housing units, and Traverse City actually did adopt something probably about a decade ago, where they encouraged that they encouraged new developments to include affordable housing. The problem is most developers aren't going to use it because it's expensive and they're not going to make any money on it. It is effective in other states where they're able to require it. We're not able to require it in Michigan. That's one reason we haven't implemented it. But there's you know, there's a variety of carrots that you can use to get there. I think Ashley might have mentioned deed restrictions and you know, tax incentives and that kind of thing, that if local governments are willing to offer that, then they're probably in a slightly better position. So unfortunately, we don't have the legislation enabling us to do that at this point. I would say, though, that for the Human Rights Commission, it would be great to just have continued advocacy, encouraging the city to prioritize this in all of their discussions.
Okay, we can easily do that.
And we'd be happy to talk more with you offline about materials and resources and how we might want to approach that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Susan. We've had these kind of, well, Sarah's been doing this work for a very long time, but most recently at the coalition, we've been trying to think about organizing something around what that could look like, and we're just exploring kind of all these different ideas. So like we keep saying, this isn't something that we are going to be able to do alone, and so any partnership like that we're really open to. So yeah, let's talk more. We're always looking for new partners and ways we can approach our local governments to make some change.
Ashley, there was just a comment in the chat about having this program be available in other situations, like for the Board of Commissioners or other groups. So I don't know if you want to just speak on that, but I think both Housing North and the coalition are willing to speak at any time on this topic. Yes. So I'll just say that. So get in touch with any of us.
Yeah, I'll
do that.
I can put my contact here too. There we go. Yep, anytime.
We're recording the session, so we can share that link with everyone after the event.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
As I think I mentioned, we have a lot of materials, you know, needs assessments and talking points and, uh, you know, housing ready checklists that help local governments determine what they might need to think about. So we can share all of that information with them as well. We'd be happy to talk with them in more detail about any of it.
Mhm. And I don't have, that was kind of all of the content stuff I had. Ryan, do you have anything else that we didn't?
Yeah, we talked about maybe sharing some successes, right? We
Mhm.
think about, especially in homelessness, it's a lot of doom and gloom, right? People are suffering. But I will say this at first: the people themselves are resilient and a pleasure to serve and a joy to be around, even in their most difficult times. But when we do move people from the streets into housing, and the coalition is structured in a way now to make sure we target the most vulnerable out there on the streets, the people that have been deemed or society kind of thinks of as uh, they're given up on. Like those people want to be homeless or they need to do this or that, and they're not willing to be housed, and that's just not the case. There's every person I work with on the street wants to get into housing. They they may say some things to people that they're appearing to want to be homeless, but that really what I've found is almost a saving face defense mechanism. They're constantly having to admit, even non-verbally, that they're homeless, and that's really hard to do. And we've been able to move people that have lived on the streets for even 20 years into housing and are
Mhm.
successful living there still today. Some people we've moved in have died fairly quickly after getting off of the streets. And that, is a reminder of the work we do and how we have to help people get housing as quickly as possible. But also there's some uh, I guess reassurance that people had a house to die in, and that could be a grim view, but it's life changing for the people we serve. um, I remember we had one guy that he was experiencing homelessness for about 7 years, that we worked with, and some people that they get arrested over and over again or in and out of treatment, and people that even have told me, even people in this world that we work in, that person wants to be homeless. But I'll get messages, phone messages, 3 in the morning sometimes. Ryan, you got to help me get out of this situation. And it's those very people that we look at and say they want to be there that are asking for the help. I'm glad the coalition has come around to the point where we're all agreeing on we have to help meet people where they're at, no matter where they're at, and help them get out of there. But this man, he had pneumonia, and he would have pneumonia for a long time, living in damp, swampy areas. He could never shake it. He did at one point caught it again, and he moved into housing while having pneumonia from living on the streets, and died 3 months later from pneumonia, and never was able to kick that. Um, some people may not think that's a success, but it was for him. It could have been better, but we have stories like that all the time. One guy was experiencing homelessness for 20 years. Um, People have ambivalence about housing sometimes, and they're used to, or they have this impression that they have to give up everything or be a spectacle to be in housing, and it's hard for them to come around. And then when they do and they realize it's not that, it's good. But this guy survived well on the street, was very crafty, had tents and shacks, if you will, all over the town. And we were able to get him to housing, and he did pass away, but he passed away with dignity with his own place. and that's really good. We've had others. One woman lived on the streets, another one about 7 years we worked with, and she struggled with alcohol, drank a lot, and trauma in her life. And I've taken her to the hospital several times over the years, and you know, I've been doing this a long time. So I think of, in my mind, along with our objective-based tool that tells us this, but the most likely to die next on the streets, right? I didn't think she would make it. She's been in housing, I don't know how many years now, 5 at least. We don't hear from her anymore. She's successful in housing. And sometimes people, they're like, I wonder why she doesn't, you know, come around and come back and volunteer. And she used to in the beginning, but she doesn't anymore. But it's okay. Like we're here to help the people at their most vulnerable time. And if they get out of it and don't need us, like that's what we want. And that's so many untold stories of the success of getting people into housing that we don't hear. But there's so many of us, you know, housing advocates and you know, even policy writers that are changing something or a zoning change that no one ever knows or will see the people that it helps. But it's really awesome. I guess I'll leave with that.
If I could just add on to what you're saying, Ryan, I think homelessness is such a much more visible problem than just kind of an ambient housing need. And people want to contribute to the solution with homelessness because you know, it's a much more tangible action to help people in crisis. It's much more difficult to want to be involved in something that could take years and requires a lot of public pushback and may not be successful, and where you have to bring, you know, a dozen different parties on board for a really complicated project that may house a few people or not. And it's the solution that we need. It's harder to bring people on board to do that. And so we've been really grateful that the coalition has recognized that that's where we need to start, and that housing is the ultimate goal for all of us, and that we can count on them as advocates for creating new housing units. So we really appreciate all the work that you've been doing for people in crisis and for long-term solutions.
Thank you guys for allowing us to be here today and talk about this. And yeah, our contact info is up there with all of yours. So if anybody has other questions or knows a landlord that wants to work with us, reach out. Or if you just want to learn more and become a partner of this incredibly important work, please reach out anytime.
Thank you, Ashley and Ryan. And just so everybody on the call, I know there were some technical difficulties signing on. We did record this. We'll send it out so you all have access to this. And please get in touch if you do have any questions, both Housing North and of the coalition. And we look forward to hearing from you and working with you. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.